Well, I was born in the Scotland Road area of the city, in Fontenoy Street, which runs parallel with Scotland Road, from a working-class family. And in that area, that was at the, I suppose, what you could call still at the peak of Liverpool's maritime power, particularly in the immediate post-war period. I was born in 1939. Liverpool had kind of re-established itself as a major port in the second city of the empire, etc. And I was born into that environment of dock labourers, of merchant seamen, of ex-squaddies. My brother was in the Royal Navy, my dad was in combined operations, he went ashore in Normandy, etc. I went to the school, 3 schools in the area, St Mary's, Holy Cross and Bishop Goss. So that was where I sprang from, from a solid working class background. That kind of informed my outlook.
The organised labour movement is making great gains on the docks and appealing to drivers to give support to the trade union movement. Workers united! Will never be defeated! The workers united!
I left school in 1954, and in the first few months I was an apprentice tailor, an apprentice baker. I then joined the Blue Funnel shipping line for a number of months, went to Outward Bound Sea School, left there. My mother was very keen on me getting a trade, and that's when I came back and became a cabinet maker. And then an opening became vacant in the printing industry. Now, the printing industry, they were always considered the aristocrats of labour. The best organised trade unions, the best wages and conditions, job for life, etc. So I left the cabinet making trade and became a printer, a compositor, and served a 6-year apprentice. And again, during those years, it was like a university, an oral university, because there was blokes working there. One of them had lost a lung on the Western Front, World War I. One of them got shot in Gallipoli. Another bloke had lost an arm at Dunkirk. Another guy took shrapnel in the back at Arnhem. So there was this incredible array of history taking place in front of your eyes. And that whetted my appetite, for an understanding of the historical processes, what caused these wars. These men are coming back to the trades. Some of them severely injured. They recovered, but still suffered the consequences of their wartime experience.
I suppose you think I enjoyed sending those 2 men up there. Sending them up in crates that should have been on the scrap heap months ago.
That's right now, say it. But I'm a murderer. I ought to give you better planes, older men, better flyers. Say it, why don't you say it?
It's rather like a game at school. Great, big, noisy, stupid game. It doesn't make any sense at all. Then one day, I suppose it'll all end as suddenly as it begun. We'll go home. Till some other bunch of criminal fools sitting around a table shove us into another war and we'll be at it again.
So that as well was, part of the development. I became active in the union. There was a big strike in '59 where we made the print union made the breakthrough, the first one in Britain to establish the 40-hour week. And after we got the 40-hour week, after the 6-week strike in '59, then the rest of the industries followed. So that was a significant learning curve in terms of, the way that the unions can act in a decisive way to improve workers' working conditions. So again, that was a very, key component in my kind of trade union labour education.
The Union is mobilising maximum possible support for these ancillary workers. And we're calling upon the people of Liverpool to demonstrate your solidarity and support in the way you always have done in the past to assist workers who are desperately fighting to defend the most basic living standards that they're entitled to.
After many years, I went back to sea. Went sail with the Canadian Pacific a couple of years as a ship's printer. We used to produce daily newspapers, etc. Again, a very good experience. And what strikes you as a life at sea, particularly the big ships, the Canadian Pacific. I sailed on the Empress of Canada, the Empress of England, the Empress of Britain, was the class divisions in a relatively small space where the captain was God the officers enjoyed an opulent lifestyle, and you had the middle rankers like us, tradesmen, and then the rest of the crew who were down below on the working alleyway. And there was very, very strict divisions of class. For instance, it was only the officers who could mingle with the passengers. It was only the officers who could go into the bars with the passengers and have a drink. The rest were confined to below decks. Very clearly defined class lines at sea. Nevertheless, very good experience.
And it's my honour, I suppose, today to address you, welcome everybody to this demonstration. It's a small demo, nonetheless very important. And we continue to fly the flag for the people who Sheila correctly described as those least able to defend themselves. I do a piece on Radio City. I comment on Prime Minister's questions on. And yesterday I heard Theresa May using the Brexit speech, and she used the word fairness no less than 20 times. This is a woman who represents a party who's transferred £56 billion worth of wealth from the working class into the hands of the top 1% in society.
Eventually worked for the Tinlings Printing Group, became very active in the union, and became an FOC. And I was at that stage, I came across people who were in the Labour Party Young Socialists, and who were linked to what would become the militant tendency. So I first heard about Trotsky, for instance. I consumed books by Trotsky, Jack London, George Orwell, Upton Sinclair, Sinclair Lewis, all of these great books, great authors. The role of the Labour leadership became very clear. The role of right-wing trade union leaders became very clear. Rather than campaign to change society in a fundamental way from capitalism to socialism, they worked to get what they termed a sensible working arrangements for the working class.
McDonald's is a multi-billion international organisation which makes billions of pounds in profits and is capable of paying these workers at least £10 an hour immediately for a 35-hour week, and granting trade union recognition in order to allow the trade union movement to negotiate a decent contract which gives them holiday pay, sick pay, a 35-hour week.
I mean, for instance, I read the biography of Jimmy McGovern. What a class fighter he was. I mean, he was a giant of a man, both physically and morally and in terms of his own courage. So that was the process that made me aware of becoming involved politically, and then joining the Labour Party, joining the Liverpool Trades Council, which in the old days, that was a joint body. The Trades Council and Labour Party were united in 1924, and that was like the university of the working class. Like when I first went, there was people like Eric Heffer, Eddie Lloyd and Terry Fields, all these class fighters, Huey Dalton, many, many more, Ken Stewart, councillors who fought in those days. And I'm talking about the early 60s, who were prepared to fight and take their own leadership on. And so the old joint body was like the university of the labour movement, where you learnt your craft, you learnt how to speak, you learnt how to analyse cases and put forward arguments and prepare move resolutions. So it was a great kind of citadel of working class activity. And the great struggles, when I first went there, the big struggles was against increases in council rents, then against the imposition of trade union laws by a Labour government under in places drive. But the rent issue was a recurring issue, constantly. I mean, in those days, the Liverpool City Council had 80,000 council homes. Between 77 and 83, 100,000 jobs had been lost within the Merseyside area. 65% of the Liverpool economy had collapsed. The number of factories that closed, it was like the death knell of British capitalism. Standards went, Tate's went, half the docks went, shipbuilding and ship repair all but disappeared. The big biscuit companies cut back. English Electric pulled out. In Garston, we saw the closure of the bobbin works. We won a majority in 83, where for the first time for a number of years, Labour had a working majority inside the City Council. We opposed the building of any more of these blocks, tower blocks, and we voted for a programme of housing with gardens to dismantle, to demolish some of the worst housing in Western Europe, to develop the areas environmentally, to set up an urban redevelopment programme which was a holistic approach to 17 areas in the city, not just on the question of housing, but on environment and developing pleasant living areas. We also, in that programme, there was total opposition to any further cuts, because Michael Heseltine, who Joe Anderson gave the freedom of the city to, he had slashed between 79 and 83 £100 million from Liverpool's budget. So a part of our programme was to campaign to get that money back. And that we proceeded to do. And we were the only council who actually succeeded in extracting funding from the Tory government, which amounted to the equivalent of 60 million quid, which allowed us to carry out our house building programme. You see, Kinnock and his cohorts projected this notion, which was taken up in the pages of the media, of course, agencies of the media, that what we had in Liverpool was a sinister group that had seized control of the council and then were carrying out policies to provoke revolution. Kinnock used to use inane terms like, it's got to be grey before it goes red. I mean, I didn't know what the man was babbling on about. It was actually completely the opposite to that, because what it was in Liverpool was a broad, popular movement. Militant supporters played a significant role in the leadership, but the Liverpool District Labour Party, as I indicated earlier, was a very broad-based organisation and discussed policy, formulated policy, and told the council precisely what they expected the councillors to do once they were elected. So this notion that it was a small clique at the top that took control just doesn't bear up to serious scrutiny. This was a popular movement from below. And this notion that the programme was implemented by bullying people is absolute nonsense. I can't recall any bullying in the party until Kinnock controlled the situation, where he sent in people like Kilfoyle to wreck the party. He was given unlimited powers. He tore up the rulebook, which was up to then one of the most, well, it probably still is, the most democratic rulebook you've ever seen. And in fact, we never violated a single paragraph of the rule. We stuck to the Labour Party rulebook, which said very clearly, the party makes the policy and the councillors carry it out. That's what the rulebook said. And in fact, Eric Heffer, in his last book, Never a Yes Man, made the point, he said, the Liverpool City Council were the only council that actually carried out policy determined by the Labour Party conference. And of course, that was only possible on the basis of a mass movement from below. And on that basis, we were able to organise mass demonstrations, 20,000, 30,000, on one occasion, 50-odd thousand, marching through the streets of Liverpool. So we enjoyed that kind of popular support. On Democracy Day, 1984, we marched from Islington Square to the town hall, and there must have been 50-odd thousand on that demo. On that day, 10,000 dockers came out, as well as the 30,000 of the local authority you work for. So this was a broad popular movement. And not only on the streets, also in the ballot box, we got the highest Labour vote ever recorded in the post-war period. We got more votes than in 1945, and that's in spite of the fact that the population of the city had declined from 700,000 in 45 to 460,000 in between 83 and 87. We got the highest Labour vote ever recorded. Before we took control, in local elections, you'd get 11%. If you were lucky, 20%. We were getting turnouts of 40, 50, on one occasion, 65% during that period. And in the both general elections, 83 and 87, if the Liverpool vote had been replicated nationally, Labour would have stormed to power with an overwhelming majority. And therefore, what we could argue, if you stick to your guns, you will get the support in the ballot box. If you translate socialism as the language of housing, the language of jobs, the language of services, the language of nursery schools, the language of education, then people will support you both on the street and in the ballot box. Those lessons were completely lost on the Labour leadership. They were lost on Kinnock, they were lost on Blair, they were lost on Mandelson, and we end up in the position that we are today. There's no question that this event marks a sea change in how the role of the 47 in the city's history is used. Our achievements are well recorded. The houses that were built, the sports centres, the education facilities, the job creation, the apprenticeships, and fighting Thatcher, the only city who succeeded in securing funding that the government has stolen from the city, with Michael Heseltine at the time.
Well, here tonight is a celebration and unveiling of the plaque for the 47 Liverpool councillors who were debarred from office for standing up for working people. It was an incredible period in the early and mid-80s with a Liverpool City Council that was prepared to stand face to face with the full might of the Thatcher administration and say, we're not going to cut jobs, we're not going to cut services, we are going to build homes for our community. And these are brave, brave people.
And that coincided, of course, with the attack upon the trade union movement, and very few people fought back, you know, but I'm glad to say there were councillors here who did. But I just think always remember, and then of course these people who do fight back are thrown out of office by an unelected district auditor. You know, and these days we hear talk about local democracy, etc. But when it doesn't suit, when it doesn't suit the powers that be, local democracy, you know, is just gets in their way, you know.
The Merseyside Pensioners Association, I think, is a great platform for not only defending the position of the more mature members of society, it's also a platform to campaign on the inequities within society, to keep the ideas of socialism alive. Because, in my view, the pensioners' movement is the memory of the working class. Because what you've got in there is thousands of years of concentrated experience. When you consider that there's 11 million pensioners in this country, 2/3 of whom, I would argue, were working class, that is a substantial component of the working class population. And to imagine, 8 or 9 million pensioners doing nothing, not making their experience available, and not using their experience, their campaigning experience, their experience in the labour movement, their experience through life generally, a criminal waste of experience and energy. So I think as a pensioners movement, we can keep chipping away, we can put pressure on the trade unions to use that power to mobilise organising of leaderships of the working class and lead them in the direction of an alternative form of society, which obviously is a socialist one. Well, we're here to give a very warm reception to one of these fascist fringe groups, which once again decided to target Liverpool to demonstrate their power and influence. What we've seen today is a massive counter-demonstration of the labour movement, community organisations, various anti-fascist groups, the Liverpool Together, the trade unions who came down and put on a magnificent show of opposition to anywhere the fascists raise their heads and attempt to defile the atmosphere in Liverpool. The message from Liverpool today: every time you raise your snouts, the Liverpool working class will mobilise and drive you out of the city, and ultimately drive you into oblivion. You continue doing what you do as long as you can do it. And the day, somebody comes up to me and says, look, Tony, you better back off, lad. You're beginning to babble. Well, maybe those, I'll shuffle off my mortal coil and ride off into the sunset. But until then, I think as long as you've got breath and as long as you can make a speech and continue to turn up with a placard, then I think you should continue. I think all of us have got a lot to offer. I think it's a waste with somebody with the experience of a senior citizen who's got decades of experience of the labour movement, not to continue to use that experience to make a contribution to the struggle, even if it's only a small contribution. Then I think you should continue to do that. I think the day you stop doing that is the time to get lowered into the ground.